pivot to work virtually, get the benefits of digital transformation, perhaps make some progress on ESG before the war started. There is anxiety, but there's underlying hope.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
A very warm welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Isa Suarez. Tonight, the U.S. President and the Israeli Prime Minister are united in their aim, but divided on how to take on Iran's nuclear ambitions. Street celebrations break out in Colombo after Sri Lanka's president formally resigns. And the heat wave scorching parts of Europe sparks fierce wildfires. We are live in Portugal this hour. The first divisions over how to handle Iran and its nuclear program were on clear display in Jerusalem on the second day of US President Joe Biden's trip to Israel. Mr. Biden and Israel's caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid inked a new security agreement, as you can see there, and both vowed never to let Iran get a nuclear weapon. But how to do that emerged really as a major disagreement. Biden saying that diplomacy and reviving the Iran nuclear deal is the best way, while Lapid insisted that only a credible military threat would make Iran back down. Have a listen.
We will not, let me say it again, we will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Words will not stop them, Mr. President. Diplomacy will not stop them. The only thing that will stop Iran is knowing that if they continue to develop their nuclear program, the free world will use force.
Well, on Friday, Mr. Biden will confront another volatile issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He's set to meet with Palestinian leaders who initially had high hopes for his administration, but now skeptical that he will deliver for them. CNN's Hadass Gold is covering the president's trip from Jerusalem, joins me now live. And Hadass, let's talk first about this joint declaration that was signed, in particular, the Iran part of the declaration, because both, as we just played out there, are united in their goal, but there's still a disagreement on the best approach. Walk us through what was said today.
Well, what we heard from President Biden and Prime Minister Yair Lapid was the clear dividing line between the two of them on Iran. President Biden once again reiterating that they prefer, the Americans prefer the diplomatic way to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. But Prime Minister Yair Lapid standing right next to him, saying right on stage to the president, diplomacy will not change anything. Words will not change anything. They are trying to convince, they have been trying to convince the Americans that the only way they believe to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon is from having that military option very clearly on the table. Now, part of this declaration that they signed today, the Jerusalem Declaration, in it is the American commitment to maintain Israel's military qualitative edge over its enemies, and also a declaration that Iran will not be able to obtain a nuclear weapon, and also a recognition from the Americans that Israel will always defend itself, potentially even by itself if necessary. This, you could read that this is a possible way for Israel to say, look, we'll take strikes out on our own if necessary. But for the Israelis, they really want the Americans to present a coherent strategy, a plan B on if diplomacy fails to keep Iran from obtaining this nuclear weapon. And also the Israelis are against the return to the Iranian nuclear agreement on other issues as well, because they're worried that once the agreement, if it's signed, that it might unfreeze all of these assets. That could only help further push Iranians to push their regional allies here, like Hezbollah, that Israel sees as a major threat to them. This was probably the main dividing line. Otherwise, for Israel, they liked a lot of what they heard today, especially President Biden declaring that he was in the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. This was, of course, something that President Trump did, former President Trump, declaring that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel, and President Biden reaffirming that today. Isa.
And Hadass, we did hear, of course, President Biden in the last 24 hours reaffirming, of course, the importance of the Jewish state and a two-state solution. But we also know that this administration is not pursuing kind of high-level shuttle diplomacy to try and reach an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. So what are the expectations from the Palestinian side when, of course, the president meets with President Abbas tomorrow?
Well, listen, on the tarmac yesterday upon landing, President Biden said it pretty explicitly. He said, I still believe in a two-state solution, but he essentially said, I know that it's not going to come in the near future. And I think that's a recognition of also the internal politics between both the Israelis and the Palestinians that both have sort of these calcified political situations. In Israel, there's a caretaker prime minister who only took over less than 2 weeks ago. There's elections in November. In the Palestinian Authority, you have President Abbas. There's questions about for how much longer he will be leading the Palestinian Authority. There doesn't seem to be a lot of momentum internally, and I think the Americans recognize that. For the Palestinians, though, they had a lot of hope when President Biden took over from former President Trump, but they now have what they're starting to see as a long list of disappointments in this administration. 5 years ago, on his last visit to the White House, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas made a rare venture into English.
Now, Mr. President, with you, we have hope.
Several months later, that hope proved to have been terribly misplaced.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Under Donald Trump, U.S. policy tilted heavily towards Israel. The Palestinian political office in Washington was closed. The American consulate in Jerusalem, which symbolized U.S.-Palestinian relations, also closed, and almost all economic aid to the Palestinians was switched off. So when Joe Biden won the election, there was great relief among many in the Palestinian community. But that relief has little to show in terms of action. The Biden administration highlights renewed financing, about $500 million, mostly on schools, hospitals, and other humanitarian aid projects. Further $100 million is set to be announced on this trip, including some money for Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem. But politically, the White House seems unwilling to pressure Israel over continued expansion of West Bank settlements and weak in the face of Israel's resistance over plans to reopen the consulate in Jerusalem. Hussein Sheikh is one of Abbas's closest aides.
The U.S. administration has been talking with us about these issues for more than a year, but nothing has been achieved. Even so, we continue to hope this visit will produce serious outcomes, that it provides hope and a political horizon.
Biden's visit to the West Bank will take him not to Ramallah, the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority, but to Bethlehem, just a few miles south of Jerusalem, where the president will find it hard to avoid stark reminders of the conflict. One issue that will likely be staring President Biden right in the face, the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. This giant mural of the Al Jazeera journalist is right on the road you take as you enter Bethlehem. For many here, the U.S. response to the death of the Palestinian-American reporter, shot dead while covering an Israeli military operation, has been inadequate and indicative, they believe, of the U.S.'s unwillingness to force Israel to get serious about peace and bringing an end to occupation.
Putting an end to this injustice, putting an end to this impunity is important because it sheds light, it continues to shed light on the greater picture of what Palestinians continue to endure on a daily basis.
From the Palestinian perspective, the overwhelming feeling around the president's visit is one of pessimism. And Issa, while there have been some small confidence-building measures, some gestures from the Israelis, such as increasing the number of work permits for Palestinians who can come from Gaza to work in Israel, increasing some of the building permits, opening a new border crossing, I think that tomorrow's visit, President Biden's visit in the West Bank and his meeting with President Abbas will be very important to watch the tone, the body language. I'm going to be looking for things like, do they issue their own sort of joint statement, joint declaration, or will they be separate statements? And I think that will give us a real sense of what the feeling is like in the Palestinian Authority towards the Americans. Issa.
Hadas Gold for us tonight, live from Jerusalem. Thanks very much, Hadas. Well, after his trip to Israel, President Biden will visit Saudi Arabia for more diplomatic talks, but he hasn't said if he'll bring up the slaying of Jamal Khashoggi with the country's leadership, even though U.S. intelligence has determined that senior Saudi officials were responsible for ordering his death. Here's what Mr. Biden said when he was asked about it today. Have a listen.
My views on Khashoggi have been absolutely, positively clear. And I have never been quiet about talking about human rights. The reason I'm going to Saudi Arabia, though, is much broader, is to promote U.S. interest, promote U.S. interest in a way that I think we have an opportunity to reassert what I think we've made a mistake of walking away from, our influence in the Middle East.
Well, during his trip, it's unlikely Mr. Biden will discuss some of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's controversial projects. Our Nick Robertson takes a look at some of them for you.
President Joe Biden might see this on his way to meeting Saudi's leaders. Whole neighborhoods of the kingdom's historic second city, Jeddah, erased for modernization. Or he may see this: thousands upon thousands of new homes being built on government orders.
What Biden is unlikely to see are the people we met who told us they're unhappy their homes were demolished, but are afraid to speak out publicly.
The housing changes are a fragment of massive reforms authored by the kingdom's leader-in-waiting, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom Saudi critics outside the country say is failing to deliver.
It's very clear there is a big fail with the vision, basically because it is a one-man vision.
Yet stroll Jeddah's old streets, as we did, and you'll find plenty of fans of the Crown Prince. Abdul Majid was one of them. Nabil Abdullah, another.
My dream, our children get a good chance. Now we are see this in new vision 2030.
Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030.
I'm with him, I agree with him.
Where generations of his family lived and worked, the Crown Prince's renovations bringing ancient homes back to life. But what happens if he doesn't deliver? He can't deliver.
Why you think negative? We already now see the positive something happen. Why you think that if we see the thing about negative, we cannot go one step?
But MBS's dreams are big and could make or break the country. Neom, a futuristic city yet to be built, its epicenter, and if the Crown Prince has his way, its economic engine for generations to come. Yet, despite several years in the making, developers' videos are all we have. Government permission to shoot there hasn't yet been facilitated. Grandiose visions of kings are nothing new here. The last king, Abdullah, had his version. I covered it 15 years ago.
It is going to be half the size of total Bahrain and 3 times Manhattan.
3 times the size of Manhattan?
Yes.
Reality never caught up with imagination. Hundreds of thousands of proposed jobs never materialized.
MBS's vision will be the test of him at every level. If there are jobs and a brighter future for most people, then happy days. But if his reforms falter, even fail, how will he respond? If it's through repression, then his relationship with President Biden and other Western leaders could crumble.
For now, leverage is mostly on MBS's side, a pivotal regional power with vital energy supplies at a time of US need.
He managed to basically make the Biden administration back down on all its promises regarding Saudi Arabia and MBS.
Haflul's sister, a women's rights activist, was freed from Saudi jail, but not the country, not long after Biden called for her release early last year. She fears MBS will read Biden's visit as approval for more arrests.
Pressure will never stop as MBS is in power. It's about the person he is. And the only thing that could change things is accountability from the international community.
Biden's time in Jeddah will be a harsh reminder of realpolitik at its toughest. Nick Robertson, CNN, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Now, Sri Lanka's president has now officially resigned after several days of cause of uncertainty. He emailed his resignation letter to the Speaker of Parliament after arriving in Singapore. Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled the country after protesters took over his home as well as his office. The Parliament is set to elect a new president next week, but for now, the Prime Minister is the acting president. Protesters overran his office as well in the last few days and set fire to his private residence. They're blaming the government for shortages of food, fuel, electricity, as well as medicine, as the country deals with its worst economic crisis in decades. I want to bring in Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief and CNN's former New Delhi Bureau Chief, Ravi Agrawal. Ravi, great to have you on the show. So the president now resigned, a victory, no doubt, Ravi, for the protester. But talk us through what happens next.
Well, it is a victory, but it's short-lived in the sense that, Sri Lanka obviously needs to now either keep its current acting president, Wickremesinghe, or it needs to elect a new one. And that could take several weeks. And compounding all of this, Isa, is the fact that there is the political crisis, but really underpinning all of this, the reason why we're here right now is the economic crisis. The fact remains that Sri Lanka has no money, no foreign currency left to be able to import the fuel that it desperately needs to keep buses and trains running, to keep transport going. It needs to import food and medicines and other supplies, and it simply doesn't have the cash to do so. To get that, what it needs to do is to appeal to lenders such as the IMF, the World Bank, possibly other countries like India and China. And the problem there, and we can discuss this, is that these are the kinds of organizations that only lend when you have political stability. So Sri Lanka, it's sort of a chicken and egg crisis in that the economic crisis led to the president being toppled, but now that that's happened, they can't get funds.
They can't get funds. They need the political stability, of course. But do we know whether the protesters will accept the PM in that interim role? I mean, didn't they want him to leave as well?
They do. So one of their demands has been that the prime minister, now acting president, also leaves. He is seen as illegitimate for several reasons. One of them being that the party that he represents only won a single seat in the last elections. But more than that, I think he's seen as cozy with the Rajapaksa family, which of course has ruled Sri Lanka in various forms over the last decade. And he's seen as having enabled them. So I think for those reasons, the fact that it was Rajapaksa who appointed him prime minister in the first place, that means that likely the protesters will not take his remaining as president for too much longer.
There has been some talk, Ravi, of a new unity government. How likely is this to happen? Importantly, will the public accept what they come up with here?
Well, it depends on what constitutes such a unity government. So the way politics works in Sri Lanka is that the parliament, which is composed of elected parliamentarians, they could get together in the coming weeks to try and propose a new president, to elect a new president, and also a new prime minister. Now, it depends, obviously, who they would like to do. The composition of the parliament is such that it is composed mostly of Rajapaksa's party. So this is a problem that goes back years to the last election and several ones before that. All of that said, these parliamentarians must know that the protesters are angry. They will stop at nothing. The fact that despite a curfew, they were able to go in and burn the personal residences of the president, of the prime minister, shows that they're not going to rest. And they've warned that even though they've stepped back for now, it'll be fairly easy for them to come together again. So I think that hangs over the parliament, and in some senses will keep them honest and will also keep them looking at the interests and the demands of the protesters.
Yeah, it is very clear that they want a clean slate. We shall see, of course, how the next few days unfold. Ravi Agrawal, always great to see you. Thanks, Ravi. Well, from one country in political turmoil to another, Italy's government has now been thrust into uncertainty. Just in the last hour, in fact, Prime Minister Mario Draghi announced his intention to resign. But now the country's president is rejecting that. It all came after Mr. Draghi's government won a confidence vote that was boycotted by his own coalition partners in the Five Star Movement. In a statement, Mr. Draghi said that the national unity that backed his government, quote, is no longer there. Barbie Nando, who frequently reports on Italy for us, joins us now on the phone. So, Barbie, what happens next?
Well, it's anything goes at this point. But, Italian politics are always a little bit shaky, especially when you're coming up to an election. Italy has an election in May of 2023. So Draghi is forced to work with the puzzle pieces that were basically determined in the last election, 2018. What he's got to do is try to find a way to govern going forward. You know, Mattarella, the president of Italy, did not accept his resignation and instead has asked him to try to find a way to keep this government going. We've seen these sorts of crises in the height of summer. You know, there are lots of factors at play here in Italy right now that don't reflect the last election. So what you've got is a prime minister, an acting prime minister, a technocrat, if you will, having to work with really what wasn't the vote of the people, the Italian people, and certainly not the situation that was in place in 2018. So what I think we're going to see is a lot of uncertainty in coming forward. By Wednesday, we're supposed to have some sort of a provisional government in place with all the players and what Draghi can try to do going forward. But it remains to be seen if that is even going to be able to take them through the rest of the summer, let alone to the elections, which is going to be held in May 2023.
And Barbie, clearly the President Mattarella believes that perhaps Mario Draghi can still patch things up. But explain why they've lost the support of a coalition partner. What kind of the disagreements at play here?
Well, I think what's most important to understand is that the Five Star Movement, which was very much a protest movement when the party was elected back in 2018, has evolved greatly. And the prime minister who brought Italy through the pandemic, Giuseppe Conte, is very much spearheading this revolt, if you want to call it that, from Draghi's coalition. So you've got a lot of factors at play. There's a lot of internal politics. Always in Italy, these deals are made in the back room. They're not made in the voters or, the ballot box by any means. But what you've got is a lot of anger and uncertainty. You've got an economy that's spiraling. You've got, a war next door. You've got a lot of people who have just not recovered from the pandemic. You've got numbers of COVID cases rising. People are afraid. The thing that puts Draghi at an advantage is he's very much a Eurocrat. Of course, he was the head of the European Central Bank for many years. He's the one who everyone thinks can save Italy. The problem is, of course, he says that he wasn't elected, has never stood for election in this country. So it's really hard to understand how he's going to be able to bring this country forward and bring it to what it needs to be. No one necessarily thinks anyone else can do it, and there's not even a name being floated around other than Draghi to take the country forward. So it's more of a case of not necessarily is he the best man for the job, or is he the only one who actually is willing to take it on right now, Isa?
Yeah, and explains, given what we're seeing, an energy crunch of coal, fears of recession, high inflation, and also, like you mentioned, war in Ukraine. Stability is of the utmost importance right now. Barbie Nadeau, I know you'll stay on top of it. Appreciate it, Barbie. Now, still to come on the show, a brutal Russian attack on a Ukrainian city far from the front lines. We're live in Kyiv with the very latest.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning at the University of Dayton.
How is everyone? What we're going to do this morning.
Tony Talbot is teaching a class about slavery.
There's over 40 million human trafficking victims in the world today.
But his students aren't just learning the facts about human trafficking. They're being trained to teach others about it, students who are even younger than they are.
We get the students to become near-peer educators, going into classrooms, giving human trafficking awareness presentations. If we tell children about this now, they can become part of the solution.
Hi guys, my name is Ami. I'm a second-year student at the University of Dayton.
Today, Talbot students are taking over Nick Pent's 9th grade American history class at the Dayton Regional STEM School.
It's definitely important to know what is trafficking, because maybe you're in that situation and you don't even know that you're being trafficked.
A lot more online trafficking is happening. I didn't really realize that before, but now that we do, you can obviously use more precautions when you're online.
I'm hoping that my students, now that they're knowledgeable, hopefully they get a little bit passionate about it, become leaders. I'm telling you, you just got to step aside and let the next generation do its thing.
Thank you.
This is a really important story. My name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN.
Assalamu alaikum.
Day in, day out, you see the reality of people living through this. Ничего страшного. Okay.
This is the front line.
On a human level, you find courage, sacrifice, This is what life is about.
A lot of people are wondering why.
You see the worst of humanity.
Putin might use a nuclear weapon. Absolutely terrifying.
But you also see the best of humanity. My job is to be present.
The human cost is right here.
And to tell these stories.
We're talking about families.
That is the most important thing. I'm Clarissa Ward in Ukraine. This is CNN.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls it an act of Russian terror against an ordinary, peaceful city. Cruise missiles slammed into Vinnytsia today, hundreds of kilometers from the front lines. Police say at least 23 people were killed, but that number could rise as many others are still missing. Our Scott McLean is following the developments for us from Kyiv this hour.
Air raid sirens went off in central Ukraine this morning. They could be heard here in Kyiv as well. That has not been a common sound as of late. Turns out the target was the city of Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, nowhere near the front lines. Local officials say that 3 missiles hit the city and struck an office building, as well as damaging 2 residential apartment buildings nearby. Officials say that there are multiple people who have been killed, including a young child. The Ukrainian foreign minister was quick to call this a war crime. Now, this comes after a period of relative calm for Ukrainian cities that are far from the front lines in the central and western parts of the country. President Zelensky has long called on Western allies to help his country beef up the air defense systems to prevent this kind of attack from taking place in the future. Scott McLean, CNN, Kyiv.
Well, Ukraine says the southern city of Mykolaiv has come under massive attack yet again. This video shows the devastating moment a missile slammed into a school. Other targets include a hotel and trolleybus depot. A regional official says at least 1 person was wounded. In the Donetsk region, a separatist leader says more than 100 Azov fighters were put on trial. They were among the defenders, if you remember, of the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, the final resistance in that city before the city fell to Russian forces. And at The Hague today, dozens of countries agreed to coordinate investigations into possible Russian war crimes in Ukraine. And still to come on the show tonight, a closer look at US President Joe Biden's trip to Israel and his hope for a diplomatic deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining nuclear weapons. And then later the hour, ready for Rishi. Conservative lawmakers in the UK throw their support behind former Chancellor Rishi Sunak in the race to become Britain's next Prime Minister. We'll explain.
It's another amazing day here in downtown Dubai. Welcome.
Anas Burton and Danosh Zahidi frequently talk about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, on their crypto podcast show.
So tell us a little bit about the DAO.
DAOs can be described as a group of people who come together, usually online, with a common goal and no centralized leader.
You know, traditional companies have shareholders, management, and then employees. The idea behind a DAO is instead to empower all members of that organization to have a say.
DAOs differ from traditional companies because everything operates on the blockchain, a digital ledger that keeps track of every company decision and transaction. It's because of this the two believe DAOs have the potential to revolutionize the business landscape.
business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels, connected to your world.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Jerusalem, and this is CNN.
Welcome to the show, everyone. If you're just joining us, let me bring you up to date with our top story this hour. US President Joe Biden said in Jerusalem today that diplomacy is the best way to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. But Israel's caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid said Iran must know that the world will use force to stop its nuclear program. CNN White House correspondent Jeremy Diamond is live for us in Jerusalem. And Jeremy, so what we have here, two leaders with very different views of how to approach Iran. President Biden, as we laid out, still adamant that diplomacy is the best avenue, whereas Israel said words will not stop them. So talk us through what was said and what was agreed on today.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because in some ways they were on the same page as it relates to preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. President Biden making very clear that he will not allow that to happen, and he suggested in an interview yesterday that he would even be willing to employ military options as a last resort to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. At the same time, President Biden also defended the diplomacy that his administration has been engaged in now for months to try and get Iran back into compliance with that 2015 nuclear agreement. On that end, they are on very different pages. The Israeli Prime Minister, in fact, during this joint press conference, urged President Biden to adopt a more muscular approach, saying very clearly that words and diplomacy will not work. The only thing that will work, he said, was a credible military threat. But President Biden also made clear that even as he is willing to continue engaging in the diplomacy, his timeline is not forever. Listen.
We mean what we say. They have an opportunity to accept this agreement's been laid down. If they don't, we made it absolutely clear. We will not, let me say it again, we will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon.
And you hear the president there making clear that there is a deal right now on the table for Iran to accept. But all of our reporting over recent weeks has indicated that these two parties have not yet come to an agreement and that talks have really stalled. So it remains to be seen how long the president is willing to wait to allow diplomacy to try and work. He would not lay out a clear and direct timetable when pressed today. And again, you have the Israelis here who have signaled for quite some time now that they are more willing to employ a military option to prevent Iran from acquiring that nuclear weapon.
And in the meantime, Jeremy, all eyes no doubt will turn to tomorrow when President Biden is traveling to Saudi Arabia, where he's due to meet Mohammed bin Salman. Do we know, Jeremy, whether the president will bring up the murder of Jamal Khashoggi?
Well, the president was asked that question directly today, specifically whether he would bring up the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi with the Saudi crown prince, who, of course, the CIA has alleged that he was responsible for ordering that killing. President Biden did not directly answer the question, saying only that he always raises human rights and he would raise human rights in his meetings with these top Saudi officials. He also said that his position on the murder of that journalist is very clear, but he would not go so far as to say or to promise that he would raise the issue of Jamal Khashoggi's murder with the Saudi crown prince.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Jeremy Diamond, live for us in Jerusalem. I want to turn now to news from right here in the UK, in fact, and a major update on who could potentially become the next British Prime Minister. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak leads the race to become the new leader of the Conservative Party following the latest round of voting. As you can see, every day it kind of gets whittled down in the show. He got 101 ballots, almost 20 votes more than his closest rival, Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt. Also in the running, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, as you can see there, in third. former Equalities Minister Kemi Badenoch and Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Tom Tugendhat. Bianca Novello is here with more. And then there were five. Bianca, this is, we're getting through this very quickly. Look, let's talk about what happened today. We saw Suella Braverman, she's out. She got, I think, 23 votes, right? Do we know where those votes are going to go next? Because that could paint the picture of what the next voting round Monday is expected to look like.
Yes, and that's all important now because we're in the tactical voting stage. There's a lot of skullduggery happening behind the scenes. Suella Braverman was firmly on the right of the Conservative Party. She called herself the most and only authentic Brexiteer in this race. So Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch are the other two candidates that are considered to be on the right of the party in this race. So we would expect her votes to be distributed between the two of them. And that's at an interesting point because Liz Truss has a lot more experience. She's an established name and often a favourite among the Conservative Party members. But Kemi Badenoch's really surprised. She's been a lot more successful than people would necessarily have expected. And having that momentum and having that not having any expectations about your performance and then overperforming can be a really precious quantity in a leadership battle.
What do they like about her? What attracts Kemi to the party? What is it?
She's straight-talking, she's charismatic, so she was one of the MPs leading Boris Johnson's war on woke. That really appeals to the right of the Conservative Party. She's said all the right things on the main issues, and because Liz Truss is more of a known quantity and she's had her gaffes in the past, Kemi Badenoch, even though she's got experience in government, she's starting with less sort of tarnish and more of a clean slate.
Penny, if we bring up, I don't know if we've got a card for Penny Mordaunt, but Penny's done particularly well, and she's quite an unknown MP, a known character figure, personality here in the UK, isn't she? But what is it about Penny that so many MPs I've spoken to when I was in the Green outside the House of Parliament kept mentioning her name?
Yeah, she's really crept in from the outside. And actually today, with the results that we've had, even though Sunak is predictably as the establishment candidate,
over 100, right?
mopping up Jeremy Hunt's votes, he's well in the lead, but she's closing the gap. And this was unexpected. So Penny Mordaunt is somebody, she was the first female Secretary of State for Defence ever in the United Kingdom, not for very long, because when Boris Johnson took over from Theresa May, he fired her because she didn't support him. She supported Jeremy Hunt, which is one of the reasons that it's a bit of a blow that Jeremy Hunt chose not to support Penny Mordaunt when he dropped out of this race, because you may have expected that. She has a family from a military background. She's had some military experience herself, not on the front lines. She's somebody who's devoted to politics. She keeps underscoring her commitment to public service. I think the arguments that she makes are less strong than Tom Tugendhat, for example, who has actually served on the front line. And as he said, he's invaded countries for Britain and really put himself at risk for the country. In terms of what people like about her, I mean, I feel often like the Conservative Party is always looking to revive the ghost of Margaret Thatcher. And that's one of the reasons that Liz Truss is very popular. And she certainly encourages those comparisons. That could be said a little for Penny Mordaunt as well. But it's the idea of, bringing some optimism, a departure from Boris Johnson, but not alienating his supporters either.
And she is, I mean, she definitely has the momentum, as we've seen with the votes, as you're looking now on the screen. But she's also almost a fresh start in many ways, is she? I mean, to viewers, to the public, she would be.
Yeah, certainly. And that is something which often does well with electorates. Actually, that's Tom Tugendhat's slogan, is a clean start. And this is where candidates have to walk the tightrope, because they need to show that they're going to be something different that can win elections and try and move away from all the PR damage that Boris Johnson's government did. But equally, there are a lot of people who still support Boris Johnson, so they have to keep those on side as well. The issue that Penny Mordaunt has now is because she's considered to be the one to beat, because she's the candidate that does the best with the members, all of the firepower of the research, of the digging up the dirt, of the criticism is now being directed at her from all the other camps. So she's now under fire, and the question is, how's she going to handle that? Something which will be fascinating to see is the two debates that are going to come up, TV debates on Sunday and Monday with these leadership candidates.
Vicky, let's bring up the graphic of all of them, because just as a final point that I want to make, I mean, it's interesting, it's looking at this, we have, three women, right? One white man, which is quite something as well. But if you're a betting woman, what would you say with the final two? Because Liz Truss could get the points, like you said, in the next round. But is Penny a threat to Liz here? Do you see a Rishi? If it's a Rishi-Liz final, who do you think will get it? Or do you think it's a Penny Penny, Rishi.
So the received wisdom is that Rishi Sunak will definitely make the final two. It would be a real shock if he didn't.
Right,
he's the establishment candidate and he has more experience, even though a lot aren't happy with the fact they feel like he's backstabbed Boris Johnson.
Yes.
Penny Mordaunt is currently the other favourite, and that's also because she's polling the best with the members who will ultimately elect this person. So MPs piling in behind her because they think if she gets to the final two, she's going to win when it goes to the membership. Where we need to keep an eye out for Liz Truss is the fact that she's gained momentum after her campaign launch yesterday, and she's the one most likely to mop up the votes if Kemi Badenoch is knocked out, because they come from the same wing of the party, which could put her sort of near on neck and neck with Penny Mordaunt. Tom Tugendhat trailing behind. He's an interesting candidate that would have shaken up the race because he comes from that One Nation left part of the party, and he would have reframed the debate and what was discussed in the issues at play.
Look, it's definitely heating up, that's for sure, and we love a bit of political skullduggery, as you say.
Love it. It's the best.
Yeah, thanks very much. Now, police in Ohio have arrested a man accused of raping and, impregnating a 10-year-old girl who later had to cross state lines for an abortion. Gerson Fuentes confessed and is now charged with felony rape of a minor under 13. The victim was forced to travel to Indiana to terminate the pregnancy. After the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Ohio's 6-week abortion ban took effect. CNN's Jean Casares is standing by New York for more. And Jean, this is a horrific story that really needs to be told. Talk us through what we know here.
There's so many aspects to this. First of all, let me just tell you what the law is currently in Ohio. Since after the Supreme Court made its ruling, you can have an abortion in Ohio up to 6 weeks. And the OBGYN that helped facilitate the procedure in Indiana told CNN that she was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant. So we don't know how that was determined and how it was determined she would go to Indiana. But the facts at this point are that the rape, and I will say alleged rape because even though he has confessed, he hasn't been convicted, it was May 12th, according to the complaint. And following that, on June 22nd, the police get a report that there has been this child rape. They file, they generate a police report. Then on June 30th, she travels to Indiana to have that procedure done. And then on July 6th, so not until July 6th, they actually take the DNA from this young 10-year-old, and the 10-year-old herself confirms that Fuentes is the perpetrator of it. So then it was just this Tuesday, so we're talking a couple days ago, they got finally the DNA of Fuentes, and Fuentes went to the police station after that. He waived his rights, and he confessed, according to testimony from the arraignment yesterday, that he did rape her, quote, on at least 2 occasions. So when you look at that terminology right there, on at least, meaning there could be more, and 2 occasions, meaning different times. So I don't think we even begin to know the breadth of this. And also they said in court yesterday that they were actually testing right now his DNA forensically so that there would be a confirmation of his confession.
Just horrific what this 10-year-old has gone through. Jean Casares, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have more news after this short break.
We share this place, we all belong. We have to restore this planet's soul. Give it water, give it sun, room to grow. I can see a better tomorrow. I can see a better tomorrow.
Well, as temperatures soar here in Europe, things are getting heated in other ways too. In a stunning rebuke, Emirates Airline is blasting Heathrow Airport for, quote, incompetence over its plan to handle a surge in holidaymakers. The London airport wants to limit daily passengers to 100,000 until September, as it struggles with staff shortages and a fierce new demand for travel. Anna Stewart is here with more. And Anna, this is quite embarrassing for Heathrow.
I mean, it's embarrassing for Heathrow, but it's essentially a slinging match at this stage between the airport and airlines. So earlier this week, Heathrow Airport said, we need to get capacity down for departing passengers. They were hoping that airlines would help them cancel around 4,000 passengers each day, and they wanted airlines to go ahead and do this. Well, not only is Emirates saying they are absolutely not doing that, that was the last line of an incredibly long statement that was stinging, essentially calling Heathrow Airport incompetent, saying they had a cavalier attitude towards customers, including airlines and travellers. And they said this: London Heathrow chose not to act, not to plan, not to invest, now faced with an Armageddon situation due to their incompetence and non-action. They're pushing the entire burden of costs and the scramble to sort out the mess to airlines and travellers. Heathrow, in response to that today, saying they had absolutely no choice. They say they asked airlines to help them before now, and no help was forthcoming.
Can Heathrow enforce this, though, Anna?
Well, at this stage, they said they weren't going to enforce the capacity cut. They said they were going to ask airlines to do it. However, today, in Emirates' statement, they said they are facing a threat of legal action, which certainly suggests that they are having some sort of enforcement. We have no response from Heathrow on this line. At the end of the day, airports cancel flights. If they cannot cope with the burden, if there are safety issues, if there are not enough people to help planes get away, then of course they can cancel flights. But I guess at this stage, they'd rather do that before time rather than letting people get to the airport and cancelling the flights.
Because that's what we've been seeing, that's what we've been hearing. Doesn't Emirates have a point, though? They had time to prepare. Where has Heathrow gone wrong here?
So in terms of Heathrow, they have said we, like many airports and airlines, face a shortage in labour. And of course, we do see this across the world right now, particularly in Europe. For Heathrow, particularly with ground handling, they say they are at around 70% of capacity there. That is actually the responsibility of airlines as well for ground handling. That is why baggage is such an issue at Heathrow, and I'm sure you've seen the mountains of baggage there. So they're saying it's a staffing issue, but they tried to recruit. They say they started in November last year, but airlines clearly think they didn't do enough.
All right, Anna Stewart, I know you'll stay on top of this. Appreciate it. Thanks, Anna. And still to come tonight, a heat wave has large parts of Portugal and Spain worried about wildfires. We have a live report from Lisbon just ahead.
Over 250 million young people are not in education, employment, or training. But how you start in life shouldn't determine what you do in the future. In the last 3 years, Future Makers by Standard Chartered has supported more than 650,000 talented young people from low-income communities, transforming lives by empowering them to learn, earn, and grow. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
We've missed the globetrotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering a city's DNA, meeting people who will share its secrets.
I love being here.
And making discoveries that wow.
You've got to be joking. Nice here, isn't it?
It's a world of wonder. Now, go and see it. Saturday on CNN, in association with Turkish Airlines.
Now, more than 1,000 firefighters in Portugal are battling blazes right across the country. These fires are burning as the country endures a heat wave. 8 Portuguese districts have been placed under a red weather warning. Spain is also trying to cope with fires as well as the extreme heat. This fire in western Spain forced hundreds of people from their homes. I'm going to have a quick look at the forecast, what they're expecting for the region, and bring in CNN meteorologist Jennifer Gray. And Jennifer, is relief in sight? Because this heat has been relentless.
It really has. It has been some of the worst heat that we've ever seen for the month of July for some of these locations. It is going to gradually get better across Spain and Portugal. Unfortunately, it is only going to get worse for places like France, and then England. Scotland's going to see some soaring temperatures as well. So here are the high temperatures for today. 44 degrees in Sevilla. Average high is 36. Cordoba 44. So pretty much right where we were yesterday. The heat is still very much there. We also have that fire risk that is ongoing because we have had very dry conditions across Spain and Portugal. So we have fire risk, we have extreme heat, and that heat is going to build to the north throughout the rest of the week into the weekend and the early start of next week. So temperatures are still extreme. Risk of dehydration is very real. We have that high risk for heat across central sections of Spain as well as portions of Portugal. And look at this, temperatures well into the low to mid 40s. Friday, Saturday, we gradually start to come down in places like Sevilla. We gradually start to see temperatures come down in Lisbon. But look what happens in Paris. Temperatures are going to be going up. So as the heat starts to relax across the south, it's just going to be building to the north. And that's where we'll see the heat expand. You can focus on that red. We'll see it expanding into France and then portions of the UK. And then even building into portions of Central Europe, we'll see temperatures above normal. So we're looking at temperatures 47 degrees in Portugal. This is the current all-time record. Current all-time record for Spain is 47. 46 in France, and then the UK is 38, and we're going to come very close to that. We could see temperatures in London in the upper 30s in the days ahead. So highs in the mid 30s. This is the amber alert for the UK. This is from the UK Met Office, and you can see across southern sections of England excessive heat with those highs in the mid 30s, and we do have the risk of dehydration there as well. So 37 degrees is your forecast high on Tuesday. That's going to come very close to that all-time record. So that's when we'll see the heat hit its max, 36, 37 degrees Monday and Tuesday, and then we really start to drop off. Average high this time of year is 23 degrees, so it is going to be incredibly warm. Paris, the same thing. We hit our peak Monday and Tuesday and then fall by Wednesday. Isa.
Wow, staggering numbers. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Appreciate it. I want to go now to Lisbon, where CNN producer Vasco Tovillo joins us now. And Vasco, I don't know if you heard what Jennifer was saying. The highest temperature recorded in Portugal was 47.4 degrees Celsius. Talk us through what has been happening and whether things have gotten any better, because there's a red alert in the country.
Yeah, as Jennifer was saying, temperature